We're here today to talk to Terry, which he's going to introduce himself in a moment here about Reishi today. Terry, if you could just give a brief intro to our listeners and watchers, that would be awesome, about who you are and what you do.
My name is Dr. Terry Willard, and I'm semi-retired, living in Vancouver Island these days. When I say semi-retired, I stopped clinical practice 5 years ago, and I was in clinical practice for a little over 41 years of seeing patients on a regular basis. I still I'm writing a lot, doing a lot of research, and doing a lot of webinars for Wild Rose College where I teach and upgrading courses. I also do a lot of corporate webinars too in that nature. So I'm only semi-retired. In this COVID time, it's mostly webinars instead of traveling around lecturing. But my pet subject, I'd have to say, over the last almost 50 years now, has been the medicinal mushrooms. Specifically, since about 1992, I've delved quite deeply into many of the medicinal mushrooms, but specifically reishi itself as a mushroom. It's one of my pet subjects. I've also dovetailed quite a bit in the last little while into research on cannabis, having several corporate clients that I'm working for formulating. And interestingly enough, we've come to a point in time where I'm seeing a huge dovetail between the cannabis world and the medicinal mushroom world. So my experience comes from both academia and it comes from clinical experience.
Sounds like a nice synergy, like the plants and the fungus.
Yeah.
What got you interested in, since 1982, you've been kind of shifting in towards the medicinal mushrooms, and you said a lot of your work has been in that area. What fascinates you? What intrigues you in this world of the fungi kingdom and reishi in specifically?
There's no question, as you can tell, I'm a product of that hippie era to a degree, growing up in the 60s and early 70s. So, of course, the mushrooms I was doing back then were a lot different than the mushrooms I'm doing or consuming these days to a degree. So I was always interested in that. In fact, I even did one of my theses in university on the spiritual experiences a person can have by consuming psychotropic mushrooms. That got me interested in that whole area for sure. So there was always this interest. And I'd have to say I was hiking along on the west coast of Canada up near Seychelles in the late 80s, early 90s. I don't remember the exact date. One of my books, I've actually have the exact dates and stuff like that. And I bumped into a guy who was picking some mushrooms in the woods, who happened to be a mycologist who'd written a couple books on it. And then he started talking about reishi, and that got me more excited about it. Then I found it while I was working in Asia, doing some research over there too. And that just kept on forcing it on me until I wrote a book in the mid 90s on reishi mushroom, herb of spiritual potency and medical wonder, which is now, of course, been out of print for many years. But it got translated into 2 languages, English, Japanese, and German. And that kept me on that kind of treadmill. Probably the other biggest thing about it is, from a clinician's point of view, because I was a very active clinician for over 40 years in Calgary. But when I say that, I also had a clinic in Vancouver. I had one in Hong Kong for a while. And I traveled around quite a bit doing lectures where I did little mini pop-up clinics all over the world, but especially Canada and the United States. And I found out that I was using reishi as the #1 medicinal supplement that I would work with my patients. So that gave me a deeper experience with it and a deeper trust in it than almost any other medicinal substance. Of course, I've used a huge array of herbs, homeopathics, nutrition, various other things, almost in the same level as any CAM practitioner or naturopathic practitioner would use. But I'd still say core to the central aspect of it is reishi. And I'd have to say that, yes, I've consumed my reishi today as almost every day.
That's
I
amazing.
consider it a herb of longevity.
That's pretty fascinating how your story has kind of um, ebbed and flowed into the different continents. And yeah, it sounds like reishi has been a really big ally for you and many of the people that you've treated. Can we touch a little bit on the different properties of reishi and how you see using it more as like an adaptogen for more of the physical benefits? And then also, I'd love to hear your take on the more spiritual and the more elevating the mind or the consciousness part of the mushroom.
If I had to sum it up in a short sentence,
Mhm.
I'd almost want to borrow a concept that's quite popular in the cannabis world and put it onto the medicinal mushroom world. And it's called the entourage effect. A lot of the medicinal mushrooms, reishi particularly, um, has an entourage effect, meaning it has a group of constituents that actually works on various things in the body. And this last fall, in China at the 10th annual, or not the annual, the 10th International Mushroom Conference, this whole entourage effect was discussed quite a bit among some of the senior researchers there, which was very exciting to see that it was a concept that was working in my mind and stuff like that. And as soon as I brought it up, a whole bunch of other people go, "Oh yeah, yes, yes, it really makes sense, the entourage effect, etc." Of how that applies to the body. I also would have to push one more level into there. We now know that a lot of these medicinal mushrooms really interacts heavily with the endocannabinoid system. Again, borrowing something from the cannabis thing, it's almost too bad that the ECS, or the endocannabinol system, was discovered only in cannabis, because there's many other herbs, from turmeric to echinacea to a lot of medicinal mushrooms interact with that. The reason I'm going into that kind of thing, it shows us a new mechanism. Certainly, we have all kinds of mechanisms of how the polysaccharides work, how the triterpenes work, how some of the amino acids and some of the nitrogen groups work, and we can go into that in whatever detail you want to. But when you actually start getting into the ECS, and I'm going to call that, instead of the endocannabinol thing, to lower the concept of the cannabinol in it, it really puts us into kind of a harmonic coherence. And if I had to say what it does more than anything else, it creates a harmonic convergence, or a harmonic coherence, that actually helps regulate our overall body. That's why when I first saw it, it sounded like the original snake oil, because it looked like it did everything. Did so many things that it was hard to believe. And that was where when I first started looking at it in the late 80s and early 90s, I couldn't believe what was claimed for it to do that it did. But through clinical experience, I found that it does everything from allergies to insomnia to nervous problems to lung problems to immune problems, et cetera, et cetera. One of the concepts you brought up is adaptogen. And I would have to say it's one of the truest adaptogen, substantially better than things like ginseng, for example, is considered an adaptogen. It's not a true adaptogen because it has some problems related to it. Maybe Eleutherococcus senocosus, or the Siberian ginseng, is a little closer to an adaptogen. Certainly, the chaga mushroom is an adaptogen, and there are several other herbs that fit into that category. But truly, the medicinal mushrooms, and the way I like to look at it is, if I was in China, in Asia, where I practice and work for a while, they like to give personalities to various medicinal substances. And this is partly to encompass a larger story than just the physiology. And it's also for the students to remember it easier. If I had to give the personality to reishi, it depends on what lore you go to. It was either Gandalf or Merlin, meaning that it's the great wizard. All the rest of the medicinal mushrooms might be apprentice wizards or apprentice alchemists working up their lives, and of high standing and stuff like that. But the head of the whole covenant, as it may be, would be the reishi mushroom. So it has this stronger effect. There are different medicinal mushrooms that might have stronger effect in many different things. For example, the turkey tail, I'm using the common names here. The turkey tail is a lot better for the immune system and viruses and stuff like that than reishi, but reishi is very good at that also. Or you might find chaga, for example, is better when there's a problem, especially a cancer or something like that, in the digestive tract. Reishi works on it also, but chaga is just a little bit better. But as an overall effect, the reishi seems to work on all of those. And of course, we understand the chemistry of how the triterpenes work and the polysaccharides work is being studied at nauseum in academia, and we've got lots of data there. But I'd like to suggest this entourage ECS effect is an overlording, or what should I say, a bigger concept that seems to fit more categories. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I find that super interesting that you brought that up, and I'd love to go through that a little bit more with you. So you're saying that the reishi is like this master adaptogen, and it's a true adaptogen in the sense that you could probably take it for long amounts of time. It has all these effects on the different systems of the body. How do you see it specifically interacting with the endocannabinoid system, in the sense of my current understanding of the ECS is, it's sort of this interplay between the immune system, the endocrine system, and sort of our mindset and psychology. How specifically do you see the reishi mushroom interacting on a physiological level and also on this coherence level you've been hinting at?
A good question, and I'm trying to work those details through with some of the cannabis academics right now, because to understand a little bit some of the research papers that are being brought up in this area. But it appears that there's no question that most of the stuff that's understood about the ECS has to do with the receptor sites, et cetera, et cetera. And we know how they actually work, how CB1 works, how BC2 works, and several of the other, should I say, G channels throughout the G protein channels throughout the body to be able to work. But what's missing, because that's done from such an academic point of view, which I wholeheartedly trust and love, it's trying to actually work on the old concept of a key lock receptor site phenomena. And granted, this is true, and granted, this works in a petri dish, and granted that this works in all kinds of models. But if you look at something like the shamanic tradition of South America, which I've been fortunate enough to spend a lot of time studying, they say that no, most of these medicines actually work in the form of songs. What does that mean? That doesn't make any sense at all. Well, I'm saying that several of these herbs create electromagnetic frequency that also stimulate the receptor sites. What I'm saying is that it's very hard to conceptualize how these very complex polysaccharides wrapped around a protein are going to absorb into the body and actually get to a receptor site. This is like, that's how come I lost all my hair. I mean, there's no way you can figure this out. It's impossible. But if they actually create electromagnetic frequency, let's just borrow another term. Let's say it's producing a Bluetooth signal from our digestive tract via the microorganisms and creating a harmonics throughout the whole body. That seems to be way more powerful for our receptor sites than the actual chemical itself. Estimates these days is saying it's obviously it's different from frequency to frequency to frequency, but it averaged out to be 10 times or so stronger. So literally, so let's take again reishi. We know there's at least 450 polysaccharide groups there that are grouped together. Each one of them is like a Netflix station, and they're broadcasting this kind of harmonic harmony that seems to be triggering in the ECS even more than the chemical attributes are. By the way, we're starting to understand that this is quite true of cannabis too in lots of ways. For example, there is no way if you use a CBD ointment, put it on your skin, that it actually absorbs deep enough to get into receptor site. But it works absolutely phenomenally well, even though there is no actual true mechanism you can see from physiology. Again, it creates a harmonics at the local ECS level, which ripple effects throughout the rest of the body. And so, again, I'm suggesting that the reishi works, yes, very much on the chemical level, and it does have that function. And it definitely does that inside the digestive tract itself, and almost for sure with the microbiota of our intestinal tract. But that creates a ripple effect throughout the rest of the body that works with the receptor sites to even have a more profound effect. And the most important thing here, a more profound coherence effect than the actual chemical working on the individual receptor site. Does that make sense?
Sounds like you're giving us a lesson here on an elevated modern physiology lesson, which I love. Yeah, it's these more subtle things that it does make a lot of sense. And like you said, there's all the receptors and the lock and key mechanism, but there has to be something else going on. And I'm
But I
super,
have to say that's so 90s, you know,
yeah,
so 90s. We're in 2020, man. We have to tool it up a little bit.
yeah, we got to elevate for sure. I really like the coherence that you're talking about. I
And
think,
this really fits into how the ancient Asians use it a lot. When you look at the mythology around how Ling Chi in China was used, to even understand that it was, if you took the last emperor of China and you looked at its robe, it had a reishi mushroom right in what we would consider the heart chakra. The whole throne was had reishi mushrooms all around it, and above it, it had a reishi mushroom, and the whole palace thing was suspended on cement versions of reishi mushrooms as things. So they elevated it to a mythical status itself, even way above ginseng, way above these other things. So they had a mysticism that goes back millennia itself. And so if we can kind of take that kind of folklore, bring it into modern era and try to understand that in a physiological chemical way, I think we understand how reishi is. So I again, the only analogy I can come along to, I like the Merlin tradition. So I'm going to say it's the great alchemist as a way. But we certainly can understand how the chemical physiology works on it. Therefore, it can tune up almost every acupuncture meridian. It can tune up almost every system in the body. That's why I consider it a superior medicinal substance. I almost want to say a herb, but it's not really a botanical. As we know, the fungus kingdom is a kingdom unto itself. So as a medicinal substance, it's king, queen, wizard, whatever you want to call it.
well, let's go with wizard. I like that. Do you want to share one or two, or just anything that comes to mind in terms of using reishi with a particular client, or anything that stood out in your past clinical history of when it really kind of exemplified this king status?
That could take us days because I work so much with different things. But I'm going to start back at the beginning. Certainly, I use it for various things, and I started using it myself because partly being an academic and partly being myself, I've had chronic insomnia my entire life, meaning that I hardly ever slept more than 4 hours for many, many years. So all my ways since the early 70s in university, all the way through, I only ever slept 4 hours a night. Now that really gave me a lot more productivity, which is great. So I got to do a lot of writing and researching and stuff like that. But if I introduce reishi into the system, I would be able to shut my mind down for longer periods of time to keep me calm. One of the bylines that's used for it in China is to protect an academic from their own brain. And
Mhm.
since I resemble that statement, I decided I'd try it. And dang, if it didn't work really well for that, it calms down the mind. Almost an analog of how CBD kind of calms down the anxiety in the body. And again, this is where some of that parallel comes in. So I remember giving it to a professor of history at U of C. He was a patient of mine, and he was a very, very nervous person. Um, and partly his history was really dealing with wars over in Europe that he was involved in over a long period of time, Chechnya and places like that. As soon as he did the reishi, it calmed down his whole personality. It calmed down everything in his life that he could do it. And after a month or so, I says, "Well, how did it work for you?" He says, "Well, it's like a half hour's worth of meditation whenever I take it." So I'm going, meditation in a bottle. I think there's a market for that in North America. And that's one of the reasons I started working with it a little bit more on a commercial level too, because it really calms down the mind. But it equally works as well in many other things. Again, if I have a person who has irritable bowel syndrome, it'll calm down the digestive tract. So it didn't matter if a patient had Crohn's disease, or if they had colitis, or they had irritable bowel syndrome. It would calm down the nervous system, and almost for sure the microbiota there, that would give it a chance to be able to help heal in area. So that was very successful. I also found, but it always worked a little bit better if I put some chaga with it,
Mm.
because it has huge amounts of SOD, superoxide dismutase, in it that really works on the digestive tract. Even though SOD doesn't absorb very well, it's great in the digestive tract. I would find the same with the respiratory tract, especially. I was a heavy user of Ma Wong with a lot of my patients that had asthma, and when they stopped letting us use as much Ma Wong or ephedra seneca in the practice, I adapted a reishi cordyceps mixture and found out it was even better for opening up the lungs.
Mm.
And a lot of people who have asthma, in fact, a majority of the people who have asthma also have an anxiety syndrome that goes along with it. The reishi cordyceps, it would give them more energy, calm them emotionally and mentally down, and open up their chest, aka a bronchial dilator. And so that would really work. It would work in forms of allergies. It would work in the form of asthma. And of course, one of the most common forms of asthma is allergic asthma, or asthma due to allergies. So it really worked quite a bit on that. When it comes around to its lipid cardiovascular system, in the early 90s, the WHO was doing research back there on various things. One of the major health issues, as we know, is real cardiovascular incidences, one of the top killers in the world. And they were trying to look at what substance would be the best for lowering cholesterol, lowering triglycerides, lowering blood pressure, and a heart tonic at the same time. And reishi came out at the top because they were not just looking at pharmaceutical things; they were looking at folklore things too. So I don't think I really saw, since about the mid '90s on, a cardiovascular patient that reishi wasn't a primary function inside that, to be able to calm down the tension, be able to lower the cholesterol, lower the lipids in general, and also keep the blood pressure in lung in area. So you can almost go through each system in the body and see how it would function in these areas. Certainly, its immune functioning is absolutely fantastic, and its cancer levels, again, I don't think that I've seen a cancer patient in about 30 years that I haven't suggested that reishi would be a very beneficial um, model to work with. when it came to viruses and it came to cancer, it seemed like if I add the turkey tail to it, I would get more function. So even though I say reishi really works on the mental and a lot of the physiological things with cancers and immune system, the turkey tail was a specialist in that area.
Mm.
So again, how you'd see is reishi would be the top, but you bring in the top apprentice, or the, should I say, the top colleague might be a better way of putting it, the top colleague of the great Merlin, to be able to work in its specialty area. So I combined it with all kinds of various things. Certainly, it worked absolutely fantastic on things like hepatitis, liver problems in those areas. So now we've developed delved into many of the different physiological systems, and that's why it was by far the most prominent medicinal substance I use in the clinic.
Sounds like that's a lot of there's a lot of benefits and there's a lot of roles that it can play. Can I ask you about dose and form? What do you like? What do you usually recommend? What's the dose that you usually put people on? I always find that that's a pressing question with medicinal mushrooms, especially when mixing and adding them to get that sort of entourage or that synergy effect. What's your take on that, Terry?
Well, any is enough,
Yeah,
but the ones that I like for sure are the dual extracted ones.
yeah.
Um, so really what I personally sell, have consumed today and have on a regular basis for a very long time is a dual extracted powder concentrate. You can get that in either capsules or you can get it in powder. Since the um, powders are 70% cheaper than the capsules, myself, I do that. I usually put it in my morning beverage, may that be coffee, may it be a smoothie or whatever the case may be,
Hmm.
and maybe another time during the day. So I'm talking about a quarter to a half a teaspoon. But if I'm going into critical times where I'm really mentally busy, there might be some anxiety and there might be some viruses wandering around out there. Um, I'm going to up that a little.
Hmm.
Um, so if I was looking at capsule level, that's usually 2 to 3 capsules, 2 to 3 times daily, or 4 to 9 a day. And you can take that equivalent to the powder, same. Again, I would mix it with other medicinal mushrooms depending on what we're trying to do.
Hmm.
Do not need a lot. Certainly, for example, I remember several years ago, I was working with a Cowichan elder here on Vancouver Island when I was visiting, and we were talking about various herbs, and she walked into the woods and showed me her favorite herb. Dang, if it wasn't the local reishi.
Mm.
And she was she would be at least in her 70s. And what she did is she just boiled it and got people to drink it. She boiled it for 20 minutes. Traditionally in Asia, it would be boiled for a whole day. But she would boil it for about 20 minutes and use it with really a lot of her patients. So even at First Nation um, function, they found that they could use it. They sometimes use the the red belted polypore, but most often they use the applanatum or they would use the Ganoderma thuja that both grows. And she was using them relatively interchangeable in function. So you can make it as a tea. It really absorbs quite well that way and it works functionally that way. You can take it as a capsule. I find the extracts are better simply because you don't have to take as much. If you just take the reishi mushroom and grind it up and use it that way, you're not going to get as much function as you are the extra. Meaning you just have to take a lot more and you have to digest a lot of the chitin or the other material around it. So its bioavailability isn't there as well for the microorganisms, even though you're getting some roughage in there that's going to help the microflora, and you're not getting access to the chemicals as much. Here comes the big shoe that drops. I find that the mycelium based reishi is nowhere near as good as a dual extract from a fruiting body. And I've walked around this issue quite a bit. I've definitely been in the Paul Stammet and the Jeff Chilton debate between the two, because I consider both them friends, and watch that whole thing. And I have to sit solidly, even though I respect Paul Stammet tremendously in all the great things he's done. I'd have to say the dual extract of the fruiting body seems to be the best.
Mm.
I would even go as far, if it's possible, to get Nine Dragon Mountain reishi dual extracted, which is a mountain a mountain chain in southern China, is where we've been getting our reishi lately. That's the premier. That's the primo.
Hmm.
And I was lucky enough to this last fall, just before the COVID uh, thing. And actually, in my mind, the COVID thing started in September, and that's when I was in this area. I was lucky enough to be part of looking at their harvest of the spores, which are even more concentrated over there. And there's this one guy who literally grows 1,000,000 reishis on old plum logs, and watching their operation and see how organic it was and stuff like that. Because one's always a little leery about getting things out of Asia because of the problem, and they should be. There's no question, unless you really specify what you want and how you want it, and have mechanisms to prove you can test it. They You're going to get the things going to give them the biggest profit margin. You have to be really specific and show that you have a technique of analyzing to keep them honest, to make sure you get the right stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which might even me going over and shaking the hands of the person that's growing it and making sure that's the one you get.
Yeah.
But that being said, any reishi works, even the mycelium works. But I'm saying you're getting tremendously much bigger bang for your buck if you're doing dual extracted of the fruiting body.
Would you say that's congruent across all the fruiting bodies and mycelium, or what's your take on the different species?
No, it's not. There is no question that some function differently.
Mm-hmm.
A real good example of this is the cordyceps. You can certainly do the ferment of the mycelium mass, and get one of the CS2, CS4s or stuff like that, and it still has great function. It's still not quite as good as being able to grind up the fruiting body. So in this case, I find that if I get the Cordyceps militaris off of, which has been grown on organic soybeans and rice, that it's stronger than the other cordyceps. The only cordyceps that's stronger than that is the wild stuff, which is going for $30,000 to $50,000 a kilo, which I'm not even buying that for sure. But as far as the commercially viable one, we're getting a little bit better function off the actual fruiting bodies there than the myceliums, but the myceliums are working very, very well.
Mm.
I've used those clinically for many years and had very good success with. When you're talking about chaga, is that really a mycelium? It's not really. It's not really a fruiting body. It's kind of in between the whole thing. It seems to be working very good if you extract the actual growth body of that. So it's not a completely across the board. There is places for all of them, but I'm saying that the problem with, so to be really more specific, getting down to the chemistry, if you grow the mycelium on a grain, you're diluting the actual chemistry / the harmonic vibrations out of it with grain polysaccharides instead of actually having the medicinal saccharides. So you actually just don't have as much of the driving force of the chemistry in there. You're competing with the millet or the rice or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. in my field in naturopathic medicine, we feel that we're working with the vital force of the person, and we're trying to always amplify that, amplify the self healing principle in people. And it sounds exactly what you're doing and have been doing.
Exactly. There's
Um,
no question. The biggest goal here is to work with the vital force, the chi, the prana, whichever tradition you want to come from, that living life force, the medicinal mushrooms, they're the great. Well, let's put it this way. If someone treats you like a mushroom, they keep you in the dark and they feed you beep. Um, and that's what mushrooms are special for. So if mushrooms can do that to other species feces, what do you think they can do for the crap in your body?
yeah.
And that's emotionally, mentally, and physically. And so the idea is to be reconstitutioning and being able to enhance the vital force by getting rid of what they say in Ayurvedic medicine, the ama, or that undigested crap that's hanging out in our body and blocking our vital force.
If we're coming up with a mushroom or having agricultural practices like you've seen in China, or with the First Nations elders, getting that direct fungus that has maybe more of that vital force would it maybe impact some of this coherence theories and whatnot that you've discussed
Absolutely.
here. Yeah.
So there's no question. For example, I'm just looking back here. Here's a small version. We have much bigger, but here's an agarikong, which is one of the greatest adaptogen things. And if it's pulled out of an old growth forest, which this was locally, it's going to be way stronger than trying to grow it in a lab or
Mhm.
trying to grow it on a farm. The the actual function here of being able to work with these mushrooms is closer to their, should I say, native environment as possible. You're going to get a stronger vital force. But that's not affordable to everyone. And if everyone tried to do that, we destroy the old growth forest. So we always have to
Right.
make a value judgment what's going to fit into our personal lifestyle. We don't want to take the last rhinoceros horn on the planet just for some pleasure. We want to be cognizant of our environment because ultimately all of our vital forces rely on that.
Yeah, that's really well put. Um, so I just want to be mindful of your time here, Terry. But is there anything else that you'd like to end this with, and anything that you think we left out that you feel is valuable for practitioners in specifically using reishi to impact the health of others?
Well, the biggest thing is try reishi on various health issues, and you can see that it really works on so many. It does work on the mind, emotions, and spirit of the body as much as it works on the physiology of the body. And there's not that many medicinal substances that can do that, besides the cannabis, funny as it may seem. But it can really fit into a practice. It doesn't have any real side effects, and at the same time, it doesn't have any drug interaction. So, because of that, it's something to really consider in almost all protocols. It's that good of an adaptogen that you don't have to worry about it. It's a little bit pricey, but it's not so pricey compared to the results you're going to get with other things. So it calms out a whole bunch of other factors that the high tech medicines and the high tech things you want to do can really get on with their job and try instead of trying to fix some of these other things. So from a practitioner point of view, again, I I worked in a very busy um, urban clinic where we had up to 15 practitioners and seeing quite a few patients a day. And most of our practitioners didn't take long before they started using reishi as a big part of their protocol.
Thank you for taking the time to chat with us about reishi and all the wonderful experience that you have. It's truly fascinating to listen to, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Totally up for it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we'll talk to you later.